Well, good morning. You knew I was going to say that. Of course, yes. Well, good morning. Good to have all of you who are joining us online and here. So we're in this series all about family. And you know, when you think about families, I don't know if your family is this way, but like everyone in your family can be so different, right? And yet, in the same family, right? And when we think about family this morning, I want you to think about like your immediate family. I want you to think about your extended family, your chosen family. If you're in a blended family, if you're just like wherever you are, like in that, I want you to think about that in this, because what I want to talk about this morning is like out of all of those differences, right? Disagreements always flow out of those, right? Like we've got so many differences in my family, just all the different ways we see things, but we can disagree about all kinds of stuff, right? We can disagree about, you know, where to go on vacation. We can disagree about what to eat. I had an argument with my kids over what raises your credit score the right way. And it's just, you know, and just like, why are we in disagreement over this? What's, you know, just all of these things. And, with disagreements, right, which is normal, those disagreements can go places where if they go unchecked or they get deeper or it becomes a kind of pattern, it can actually start pushing us away, right? If we start having disagreements that create these unresolved issues, that are these points of conflict that we keep coming back to in some unhealthy way, it'll start pushing us apart. Ever experienced that? Ever experienced something in your family and there was like that disagreement you had and you could just feel the tension, and maybe over time it just kept pushing you, and maybe nothing terrible, but it just started pushing you apart. Or maybe for some of you, you're here this morning and you're like, no, it pushed us way far apart, like to a scary place, and you don't know where to take it or what to do with it. But this happens in families. It's interesting when you think about churches, in a lot of ways, churches are like families, or families are like churches, right? It's a group of people and we're kind of united and pulled together, and yet we have all of these differences, and those differences can create disagreements, and yet we want to be together. And like, how do you navigate all of that? And the reason I bring up this thing with churches is because when you look at the New Testament, there are so many letters in the New Testament. We would call them all books, but a number of those books in the New Testament are actually letters that were written by one of the apostles and sent to a church to help them deal with something or encourage them in some way. And one of the reoccurring themes that you see in so many of these letters going to churches in the New Testament is this issue of unity, where a church is struggling because it's getting pushed, the people in the church are getting pushed apart because of differences that turn into disagreements, that turn into, hurts and all of these things. And you see all of these instances where they're trying to help a church family figure out how to navigate this. And so looking at this, I thought, there's so many places that talk to churches about this, but the parallels with a regular family are terrific. I think there's some things that we can glean from looking at that. And that's what I want to do this morning. And so we're going to look at a few passages that were written by the Apostle Paul that he wrote to different churches. And we're going to look at two in particular, but we'll kind of bounce around a little bit in all of this. But the first one I want to look at is a letter that Paul wrote to the church in Philippi. So if you have your Bibles and you want to turn there, in a minute, we're going to be looking at the book of Philippians. But here's why I want to start with Philippians, because of all the churches that Paul wrote to and talked about this thing about how disunity can come in and you can struggle over your conflicts and disagreements, the church at Philippi was actually doing really well. Like he wrote letters to churches in Corinth or Colossians, and they were struggling, right? They had some deep struggles. But it hit me this week, he writes similar things to the church at Philippi that was doing well. And here's why I want to start with that. Because if Philippi can struggle with it, then this is going to be an issue for all churches. And if it's an issue for all churches, guess what? It's an issue for every family, right? Every family is going to have differences that lead to difficulties, that lead to disagreements, that want to push us apart. So I want to start with the church in Philippi. I keep calling it Philippians. They are the Philippian people, and they live in Philippi. That's what I'm trying to do. So look with me at Philippians chapter 2, verse 1. Here's what he says. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, and get what he's doing here. Like he is trying to call us to our best selves here, right? If you and you can just see him, he's like, if you've got like anything in Christ and goodness and like all of these things, right? He's calling on our very best selves in this. And part of the reason he does this, I believe, is because when we face those disagreements, when we struggle, guess where our worst selves tend to come out? Yeah, at those moments. And have you ever noticed this? It is easier to let my worst self come out with my family than it is with just about any other group, right? It's like, think about your kids. Ever had a moment where your kids were like, right before someone walked up to the house or you met some strangers or some friends or something, like your kids were like, rah, and they're fighting. And then some strangers walk up and they're like, and you're just like, it's right. And so I think he's saying this because he knows, there's a certain kind of comfort we have around our family. And we don't always like rely on our best selves in this thing. So he goes on, verse 2, and he says this, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. And so do you feel that unity? He's like, he wants to pull them together. But at first glance, we look at that and it's like, wow, that's a lot of oneness. That feels like a lot of sameness in all of this. And I don't know if Paul has seen my family, right? Or looked at our church, but here's the thing. When Paul talks about being like one in spirit, one in mind, what he isn't talking about is sameness. He's not saying you need to have, the same opinion about all the cultural issues. You need to have the same opinion about, what is the best food and what's your favorite color. This isn't about being the same. This oneness that he's talking about is a little different. And there's one word in here that he uses that I want to key on because it's a really cool word. It's hard to translate into English because we don't have a comparable word for it in English. But I think if you understand this word, it actually helps you grasp what he's getting at. So in your translation, you probably have near the end of verse 2 where it says one in spirit. Some of you may have of one accord there. So this word in Greek is a compound word. And the first part of the word is a little word that simply means like with or like alongside. And then the second word that it's combined with isn't the word spirit, okay? But it gets translated that in English because it's trying to capture this kind of meaning that seems to would be something we might understand a little bit better if we hear one in spirit. But it's actually the word soul. The word soul. It's the Greek, the root of it is suke, which we get our word psyche from it. And in the first century, the idea of the soul, maybe a little different than what we think about a soul. Your soul, as they would have understood it, is all of the things that make you apart from the physical part of you. So apart from your physical body, it is your emotions, it's your will, it's your intellect, the thinking part of you. It's, when we think about, like someone is like willful, they've got a strong will, that would be part of your soul. It's all of these things, it's your personality, how you were wired, all of those uniquenesses that make you. And so this word, the idea is to be alongside the soul. The idea is being soul to soul. Like everything that makes you are with that person, not like them, not the same as them, but it's like your souls are together. Think of it this way. It would be used this way. When soldiers go into battle, right? And you think of them drawing up the battle lines and they're gonna go into battle, and you think about the terror and the worry and the fear, but they go in soul to soul. They are depending on, right? That the person next to me is in this with me. They're depending on me and I'm depending on them. And when we're moving forward with that single objective, that's soul to soul. I have a friend who is, he's a Marine vet from the Vietnam War. And it's really interesting. If we're together, like we were having lunch a couple months ago, and like another Marine walked in, and you would have never known it was a Marine, but somehow, like he watched this guy, never met him before. And he's like, I think he's a Marine. Like, what do you see? Why do you think he's a Marine? And sure enough, the guy was like a Marine. Like, I don't know what it was, but there's like that soul to soul connection. Like, a Marine is a Marine. One time I introduced him to a guy that I knew just a little bit, and younger than me, but he was in the Marine Corps. And I introduced him and I said, hey, this is Steve. And I made the mistake of saying, and he was a Marine. And as soon as I said, was a Marine, they both were like, it's like, once a Marine, always a Marine. And something about, you can leave the Corps, but the Corps never leaves you. And I got a lecture on, I guess Steve is still a Marine. Okay, I get it, guys. But it's because they were Marines, soul to soul. There was something they shared and they held it, right? Very different. They were from different generations. They wouldn't even recognize the music the other guy listened to, right? They didn't watch the same TV shows, but they were soul to soul, see? And what Paul is getting at in this thing where he says, here's what I want to call you to. I want you to be like soul to soul, right? And when you think about being soul to soul, that kind of connection, it means that I will be there for you, right? And when you think about family, when you think about your family, it's like, I know that they'll be there for me through the good, bad, and the ugly, right? They will always take me as I am because they're family. Forgiveness will prevail through hurts and through pains. That's soul to soul. It means that you are for the other. And when I think about family in that, that's what I want. And I bet it's the thing that you want, isn't it? When you think about family, it's to have that kind of soul to soul connection. But here's the struggle, right? We can listen to Paul talk about family in churches being soul to soul, and it is a beautiful, idealistic thing to hold. But, right, there's this thing called reality that takes place in all of our families. And it's like, you can just tell, like you can hold that idealistic idea of soul to soul, but there's this reality that we all experience as you live as a family, as you communicate as a family, all those things that want to push you apart in all of this. And Paul realizes this. So he calls us, right, to this beautiful idea of soul to soul connection. But in all of his different letters, he also says, hey, I need to warn you, I need to caution you, I need you to know that there are things that you can do in your church family that will start pushing you apart. And the same is true in our regular families. And he mentions some different things. In Philippians that we just looked at, he starts off and he talks about types of selfish ambitions that get in the way or vain conceit. In the book of Ephesians, he goes through like this list of things. Let me just read some of them to you. Bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, and slander, along with envy or any form of malice he talks about. And this is in this section where he's talking about this idea of coming together. In Colossians, he talks about anger, rage, malice, slander, and I love this, and filthy language from your lips, right? Like just so he's clear, like it's just, like when you speak this. But here's the thing, when you see this in context, what you realize, he's not just like going through a list of things. He is talking about these things that are sin, but the point of them that we should not miss is sin is always relational. Sin, like it has this impact relationally. And he's saying, so it's not like, okay, you get out the list of all the filthy words you're not allowed to say, right? Because every culture would have a different list, like his point here is it affects other people. I was studying at a coffee shop, and I was in there studying, and there were a group of moms that came in and they pulled some tables together, and they had a bunch of their kids, and they're talking and stuff, and there were two little brothers that were kind of near where I was studying. And I didn't realize, I don't know what they were arguing about, but they got into this argument, and at one point I could tell like they were like really upset with each other. And the older brother, both really, really young, but the older brother is just like, oh yeah? Well, you're a great big poo-poo head. And I was just like, right? But immediately his little brother just burst into tears, right? I mean, just like, ah, and goes running off down to the other side of the tables and finds his mom. And, he's bawling. He's like, Mom, he called me a great big poo-poo head. And the mom's like, okay, what does that mean? And he goes, I don't know, But he felt it, right? Like it's this thing, the words matter. And you could just feel like, the brotherly soul-to-soul connection was fraying a little bit in that moment over there on that thing. And the point that he's getting at in this, there are these things that we can do that start pushing us apart. There was a lot of research that has been done by the Gottman Institute. We've talked about them a time or two, and maybe you know something about them, but it's a husband and wife couple that have done some of the most exhaustive relational research on mostly marriage, but so much of it applies to families, and they've done some on families. And they talk about these things that you can, in ways of relating, that actually push couples or families apart. And the parallels between what they talk about and what Paul mentions in his different letters is astounding. But I want to look at some of their research just for a second here, because it helps us understand maybe a little bit of what Paul's getting at with this. So they break it up into these four big categories, and they call these four categories the four horsemen of the relational apocalypse, okay? So when you think about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, like, devastating to relationships. And I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on these, but I wanna just list them to you and then point out a few things from their research. So it's criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And you could take what the New Testament talks about in ways we relate to one another that hurts that sense of unity. And it, in so many ways, it would fall into one of these four categories. And when they talk about these four different categories of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, it's not just big moments, but it's also all the little moments that start to add up in all of this. And one of the things that they have shown in all of this is that when we saddle up to one of those four horses and say, I'm hurt, there's this disagreement, and we go to that place of maybe a little bit of contempt or stonewalling a little bit, what we inevitably always do is we invite someone else in our family to get on their own horse and respond to it. It's like we're inviting them to do the same thing. And what they talk about is you create this dynamic where you start encouraging all of these things. And it's just natural, isn't it, right? Think about the last time someone in your family accused you of something and your first thought was like, oh, I'm so glad they told me, right? It's probably not. It's just like, okay, what's something they've done? I did, it's just like you feel that. And so they talk about how it does this. And the other thing with it is that it's the cumulative effect of how it begins working out, that there's a moment, right? So think about this. Someone criticizes you for something, and it's like you step away, but when you step away, there's always this defensive thing. And so you respond back, in a defensive way. We're like, oh yeah, well, I noticed you didn't put, the clothes away last week or whatever. And that person over there, what do? They're moving back, but now maybe they become a little cynical in this thing, and they're in a little contemptuous in this. Yeah, well, if I'm not the slob that you are, and all of a sudden, what you see is you just start moving further and further and further apart in this. And the tricky thing about this is that what their research shows is that while we often think about those big moments, like where the conflict gets really heated and we feel the distance, it's also all the little moments that we just accidentally get involved in that keep pushing that distance away. And oftentimes, we don't even notice we're doing it. Angie and I went to Walgreens to pick up I think it was some medicine, a prescription. So we get there, we get the medicine, and we may have gotten something else. So we're getting in like the regular line, and we're walking up to the register. And suddenly we started a little discussion about did you bring the health savings card? And we've got like the little HSA like debit card or whatever to pay for it. And it's like, well, no, I didn't bring it. Did you bring it? No, you were going to bring it. No, you were the one that was going to bring it. I'm sure you've never had one of these conversations, right? In your family, that who was going to do what. And so we're having this conversation, and as we pull up to the register, I don't think either one of us realized, our conversation, but the gal at the register did. And she was younger than our own kids. And Angie and I both caught a glimpse of her at the same time, looked over, and her eyes were like this big, and you could tell she was just like, there's nothing in the employee handbook about what to do with this. I got two people fighting over how they're going to pay for this thing, and then neither one brought their card, and they're just, are we going to go back to the house? And all of a sudden, as soon as we saw it, we're like, whoa, we're like this, what did we just do right now? Because you could tell, it was a moment for her in this. But in that moment though, we didn't realize what was happening in this. Ever have a moment like that where suddenly you realize, wow, I've got feelings about this. And so when you face those moments, what are you going to do in that moment? Because it keeps wanting to pull us back into it. And I think back on that moment, and that was Angie and I. It was we saddled up on a little bit of criticism, and it was like we were in the Kentucky Derby, right? And here comes criticism, and stonewalling on the outside is making its move. And then, Glenn's on, on defensiveness coming in on the inside. And it's just we're galloping up to the cash register and not realizing how much we're engaging in this thing. So here's the deal. When you find yourself all of a sudden, right, writing one of the Gottman's 4 horsemen of the relational apocalypse, when you find yourself in that moment, here's a question I want you to ask, okay? Here's the question I want you to ask. What do you really want? What do you really want? Because oftentimes in those moments, our reflexive response is, I want to defend. I want to point out something in them, right? We are wanting to pick out one of the other 4 horsemen and go for a ride. But is that what you really, really want? Because you know what I bet you really want? That sense of soul-to-soul connection. That even if I'm wrong in this moment, that person's still with me. Even if there's something I feel uncomfortable about in this moment, I know I have grace with someone in my family, right? That's what we really, really want. And I think we have to get back in touch with that. So when you find yourself in that moment, ask yourself, what do you really want? Because if you find yourself wanting that soul-to-soul connection, what Paul begins talking about in all those different passages, and we're going to look at one here in a moment, gives us a way to pivot away from one of those 4 horsemen of relational apocalypse and do something different with it. And I want to look at what he says in Colossians, because he includes some things in Colossians that I want us to look at here this morning. So in Colossians chapter 3, we're going to pick it up in verse 12. So he's gone through some of the negative things that we get pulled into, and watch how he asks us to kind of pivot a different direction. Starting in verse 12, he says this: therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. So all of a sudden he pivots after he says, get rid of these things because this is just gonna push you apart relationally. But it's not enough. I want you to catch this. It's not enough to just not do those things. There's something we need to pivot toward if we want to actually move toward one another in family, okay? And what I want to do is I actually want to take what Paul says here and in one other place and put it in 4 categories as well. And I've kind of come up with my own categories, kind of looking through this thing. And to help us remember these, I'm going to do something a little corny. Gottmans had their 4 horsemen of the relational apocalypse. Well, my family loves llamas and chinchillas, especially my wife. I don't know why. I mean, I can take a llama or a chinchilla. Anyhow, but here's my illustration. And my family is like, Dad, don't do that. That's so corny. It's like dad humor. I'm like, yes, but I'm gonna do this and it's gonna help you remember it, okay? So instead of writing one of the 4 horsemen of the relational apocalypse, I want you to think about writing one of Paul's 4 llamas of love, okay? So, right, and I know you're just like the 4 llamas of love. That's what I got out of church today, wow. But you're gonna remember it, right, okay? So, here are the 4 llamas of love, okay? Gentleness, forgiveness, humility, and valuing. And those 4 things kind of capture most of what Paul gets at. And this is what we need to pivot toward. So in that moment that you're like, oh man, I'm caught in this thing, I don't want to go there, pivot, right, to one of the 4 llamas of love. And you'll see how it begins to change from pushing you apart, right? Like if you're over here and there's someone in your family and you just feel the distance moving, there's a way to move towards. So let's go through these 4. The first one, gentleness. And here's the key to gentleness. Gentleness at its heart is expressing a kind of vulnerability, right? To be gentle with someone, there's a kind of vulnerability you bring to it. And here's why this is so important. Gentleness allows you to move forward without pushing them away, right? So if you're over here, right, and this thing's been going on, with your health savings card, and you're just like, right? Or one of your kids, right? You repeatedly say, I need you to pick up the dishes. I need you, and it's just, and now it's just like, and the dishes have just piled up instead of getting better. And I'm just like, how do I engage in this moment? Gentleness is always a way that allows you to move forward in this. And that's one of the beautiful things about gentleness. Now, the other thing with gentleness is there's a nonverbal side to it as well, right? Your nonverbals matter. I got a great lesson in this years ago. Angie and I were at a counseling appointment because there were some things that we needed to work on. And so we went to this counselor, and at one point she was like, okay, Glenn, I need you to talk to Angie and talk to her about this issue, whatever it was. And I remember thinking, I don't want to talk to her about it because I'm mad at her about this issue. This is the problem. And she's like, get ready. And I'm like, okay, I'll talk to her. And then she goes, wait, not yet. And I'm like, oh, okay. She goes, when you tell her, I want you to reach over and hold her hand while you tell her. And I remember thinking, I really don't want to hold her hand because I'm like, the whole point of me telling this because I'm mad at her right now. And I'm like, and she's like, no, I want you to hold her hand. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to hold her hand. This is hard. She's like, oh. But here's what I learned though. In that moment, right, what she was asking me to do was express gentleness in a nonverbal way. And I was so amazed. There was something about it that actually softened me to reach over and hold her hand, to use gentle words to express it to her. And it made it way easier for her to hear, right? There's something about gentleness that allows you to move toward. And here's the crazy thing. So there was something that was going on right between us or in our family that was enough that we were like, we should go see a counselor for this. But if you ask me, what was the issue? I don't remember. But I remember, I was holding her hand in it, right? Because there's something powerful about gentleness. Find gentle words, right? Find a way to speak to that issue verbally and non-verbally in this. Second, llama of love. Paul's llamas of love. Here's the second one, right? Humility. And here's the thing about humility that is important. It wants to make you open to the other person's perspective. And that's hard to do. It takes a humble heart to say, okay, I'm gonna be open and want to understand the other person's perspective. Here's why that is so important, right? You're over here, they're over there. Humility makes it safe and inviting for them to move toward you. So gentleness helps you take a step towards them. Humility invites them to make a step towards you, because humility says, okay, when you tell me how you see it, you're not gonna just shut me down right away. You're not gonna criticize this for me. I'm feeling like even if you don't agree with me, you still care about what I think in this. And so humility invites the other to move towards you. Gentleness invites you to move toward them in this. When we were in Walgreens, and right, the cashier's like, in this moment, and part of it just being married a long time, Angie and I looked at each other and we realized what we were doing, right? Like we were galloping down the road with criticism and defensiveness and immediately got to see the humor in ourselves. And this is one of the things that humility is so good at. When we take a humble posture, you know what you're able to do is laugh at yourself. And at that moment, because we're able to oh my gosh, we're doing that thing again. This is apparently we have room to grow in this. And we started laughing about it. And we actually laughed with the gal that was at the cash register, and it kind of put her at ease at that moment. And there's something about humility that lets you laugh at yourself, that eases things. And again, it just keeps on inviting that other person to move toward you. Now, forgiveness. So the third llama of love, right? Forgiveness. Here's the thing about forgiveness that is so important. Forgiveness allows you a way, okay, they're there and you're here, to move forward or toward them when you can't resolve the issue. So what happens when there's that issue that you're hurting over? It's like, no, I heard you clearly say this. And they're thinking, no, I clearly heard it a different way. And it's just like, we both have a different perspective on something that went down. Like you've got one of your kids and you're saying, no, I explained this to you and you knew better. And they're like, no, I didn't. And you're just you and your kid. You're never gonna find that middle ground and resolve this in that way. So how do you move forward in that moment? And here's the thing about forgiveness. Forgiveness is about saying, I'm going, whatever the offense is, whatever the thing is, I've got to find a way to let go of that so that I'm not captured by it, so that I can move forward towards you, even if we never agree about this issue, right? Because here's the thing about family. You're going to need that, because what the Gottmans discovered with all of their research, the vast number of hurts and disagreements and issues that come up in families and marriages, the vast number of them never get resolved. And if you're dependent on bringing your family together because you've learned how to resolve all conflicts, you're in trouble. Because there's gonna be all these times where you can't resolve the issue. You can resolve it relationally, but you may not resolve the issue. And forgiveness helps move you toward that. Let me just read this one quick quote to you. This is out of one of their books. And they talk about how most arguments can't be resolved. And then they talk about how when people hang on to, but I need to resolve the issue, they say they spend year after year trying to change each other's mind, but it can't be done. And this is because most of their disagreements are rooted in fundamental differences of lifestyle, personality, or values. By fighting over these differences, all they succeed in doing is wasting their time and causing harm. think about your family for a moment. There's a ton of things that you share, beautiful things, but I bet there's a lot of differences. There are things that you have members of your family that value so differently than you do. They have a perspective on things that are different than yours. And if you need to have oneness of perspective and all values, that's gonna be a problem. But forgiveness, right, when those issues come to a head, helps you find a way, even with those differences, to move towards the other. Okay, last llama here. And this is the llama of valuing. And Paul describes this one. So all the others came out of Colossians chapter 3. This one actually comes out of Philippians chapter 2. So let me read this out of Philippians chapter 2. This is in verse 3, right after the passage we started the message off with. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, and here it is, value others above yourselves. And he goes on and he talks about this more. Verse 4, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others, others above yourselves. And in some ways, this would have been the statement he would have made that would have been somewhat contrarian in the first century's cultural norms. Like the idea of allowing someone to have their own uniqueness valued in this way, the idea that you wouldn't call them all to the sameness, but actually say, okay, I've got to recognize that there's someone in my family, there's someone in my church, and I need to move toward them in valuing who they are and what matters to them. And here's why this one is so important, why I included this one. The first three llamas of love, right? In one sense, all center on how we treat someone in a kinder, better way that invites unity. But you can treat someone in your family with kindness and treat them well, not treat them bad at all, and still not have soul-to-soul connection. And I think the reason Paul includes this and why he talks about this one more than the others, he doesn't just list it, he actually goes back and explains it, says, I actually want you to have moments where you put yourself second so that you can value the other person, is because there is a core tenet that every human being longs for within their family, okay? Every human being longs to have a sense of purpose and value to their belonging in their family, right? Otherwise, you're just a roommate in your family, right? And here's how we get this. You wanna know that the differences that you hold in your family, right? Like if everyone in your family is an introvert and you're the only extrovert and you drive them crazy, right? You still wanna know that when they laugh at you for being an extrovert, right? That they laugh at you with a kind of adoration. Even though you bug them sometimes, you wanna know that there's something about it that they admire in you because you're family. They see the difference and they say, I value it, right? So, this is my challenge on this one, is when you think about all the different people in your family, take moments to think out what are the things that they bring that are their uniquenesses, that if you lifted that up, if you valued it, it would just help them go, I really do have a place in my family. And here's the thing that can happen so often with families. We can just easily ignore that. It's easy for us to value the things in family that we ourselves value. And my challenge to you is also value the things that maybe you wouldn't normally value because it's not one of your personal values. But if it's something with a family member that's important to them, that they value, that they have passion for, that's how God wired them, notice it and value it. Because what you're doing in that moment, you're not just moving toward them, like you're pulling them in toward you in that moment. And this is something that we all need in this. So I want to close out and just go back and read that first verse that we read out of Philippians 2. And I want you to think about that question. What do I really want? And if what you really want is that soul-to-soul connection, then move toward the other. And here's how Paul puts it in verse 2. He says, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love. And here's this word, being soul to soul, right? And of one mind. So before I close out here, let me just say, if you're a guest here this morning, we are so glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. And I would love to just shake your hand, welcome you personally this morning. In fact, and even if like 20 other people welcomed you this morning, I'd still like to welcome you here this morning. I'm gonna be right over here, invite you to come over. Love to shake your hand. If you would love to have someone pray for you this morning, we've got some wonderful people that would love to just pray for you or with you here this morning. Why don't you stand and I'll close this out here. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for all the wisdom that you provide in Scripture. And I just pray for our church family, but I pray for all the families within this church and even beyond, that you would help us to move toward one another. You would strengthen that soul-to-soul bond that we have. And we pray all of this in your Son's name. Amen. Have a great morning. See you next Sunday.